We are very delighted, but we are also very cautious because we know that it's not as if having passed the upper house is just going to be smooth sailing through the lower house, because there's very strong opposition to this bill. And I'm not talking about any kind of principled opposition, but basically what this bill is doing, or what we are doing in asking for passage of the bill, is that we are asking uh, a lot of male political leaders who have used political power to achieve various ends, whether it's making a lot of money or becoming important elected representatives or ministers and so on and so on. We are really asking them to give up their own seats. So that's not an easy thing for anybody, however magnanimous, to do. And to ask especially these people to do it's not easy, and that is why there's always been this obstruction to the passage of the bill, which seems very logical. But whenever it does come up, then there are so many. So I'm not even talking about patriarchy, I'm not even talking about people who don't believe that women should have a public role. I'm not talking about any of those kind of arguments. I'm just saying, who are the people who are expected to pass this? They are people who are not sacrificing individuals, who are being asked to actually make a very big sacrifice, because in the next 15 years after the passage of the bill, every single seat in this country will be reserved for a woman. So that means that they do stand to lose their seats, and then once you lose your seat, then who can say what's going to happen? And another thing I'd like to say is that one thing that people forget is that, with all this business of people claiming credit, it's our bill, but it's actually a bill that does not owe its existence to either the ruling party today or to the party of opposition. This is a bill that was actually drafted during the United Front government, when the opponents of the bill were actually the major parties in power at that time. And the name of Geeta Mukherjee, a leading communist MP and a very big fighter of the women's movement, is associated with this bill and should never be forgotten. That's something that I always like to say, that we have to see where this bill is coming from. This bill is coming from a tradition of fighting for women's rights and gender equality, and it was actually drafted at the time of the United Front government. So that's very important to remember. And in fact, all the people who are opposing the bill today, at that time, because whenever these non-Congress governments have come, important social legislation has usually happened, like the Mandal Commission recommendations being accepted or various other things. So I think that even though they are now the greatest opponents of the bill, but at that time there was some feeling that a great social change is being effected, and so they had all decided that they would not discuss the bill even, but it would be passed as soon as it was placed. It was most unfortunate. There is a BJP woman member, Uma Bharti, who opened the debate, and ever since then the Pandora's box that was opened then has remained open. It's not been shut. Actually, they are opposed to the women's reservation bill, but they know that if they say that, then they will be castigated as being anti-women and this, that and the other. So to put a kind of a progressive face on it, they start talking about quota within quota, and they always slip up by saying Dalits also, when actually everybody knows that there is a constitutionally guaranteed Dalit and Adivasi quota which remains unchanged. And in fact, if this bill goes through, then more than 42 Dalit and Adivasi women will actually sit in Lok Sabha, which is something that's never happened. Right now they are 17, which means that they do come from the general seats without a women's reservation. So if there is a women's reservation, maybe there will be nearly 50 Dalit and tribal women coming to parliament, which will be a historic event in itself. Now, as far as the OBC quota is concerned, you see, OBCs today in the country are not what OBCs were in 1952. At that time, they were a very small proportion of elected representatives. But today, that is not so. The OBCs are a very politically mobilized section of society. They have learnt all the tricks of electoral politics and electoral arithmetic, and they are today actually the biggest single block of elected members in most of the state assemblies and also in the Lok Sabha. Of course, in the northeast, slightly different because of tribal composition of society and so on and so forth. So, if you see the assemblies of Tamil Nadu or Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or the Lok Sabha, OBC elected members are nowhere less than 30 to 40% of the total numbers. Now, obviously, the kind of electoral systems that we have, where so much voting takes place on a caste basis, etc., if those seats are seats are reserved, the caste composition of these houses is not going to change dramatically. If you see the number of castes that will be represented, they will be pretty much the same as they are today, except that a lot more will be women, but they will be women belonging to the same caste as the men do today. In that way, if the women's reservation comes, then the OBC women actually will possibly be the biggest block of elected women. And if we see Uttar Pradesh today with only 23 elected women, out of them 8 to 10 are OBCs, which means like 40%. So therefore, it's not a problem of OBC women's electability. And then they're saying poor women, semi-educated women. This is all absolutely, I mean, they are ridiculous arguments. What are the numbers involved? All together in all the state assemblies and in the parliament, there are hardly going to be 1,500 to 2,000 women for whom the seats are going to be reserved. Many more than that number every year of OBC women become doctors, lawyers, IAS officers, IPS officers, and in the state services. So there is no doubt when we are talking about numbers like that of highly educated, highly capable women. And in any case, if you see the kind of men who are elected, they are not all well educated, or they are not well spoken, or they are not articulate. So why should we think that all these things are necessary for women who have to get elected? So these are a lot of bogus arguments. The only problem is, if there's one group or one section of society that is underrepresented, it is Muslims. They are about 14% of the population, and their numbers are regularly going down in the assemblies and also in parliament. But that is not a problem that can be remedied by the women's reservation bill. If that bill comes, the only difference will be that out of the total number of Muslims who are elected, more will be women than today and possibly few less men. But that problem needs to be addressed. You can't have the largest minority in the country regularly having diminishing representation in elected bodies. That's not good for our democracy, and it's not good for the fabric of our society. But that is something that cannot be sorted out within the ambit of this bill. For that, the political parties have to give it serious attention and come to some serious remedies. But that's not at all true. First of all, these are all absolutely erroneous arguments, because if you see even at the level of the panchayats and the corporations, it's not like that. If there's 33% reservation for women, then now it's going up to 40%, 42%. What does that mean? That women who have done well, they can even win a general seat. Women do win general seats even today, so they will continue to do so. These are absolute bogus arguments. And the thing is, who has got an alternative that will ensure that number of women? That's the main thing. People are coming up with all sorts of things, put it in the list, put it in that. Is there a guarantee that you scrap this bill and then you bring in another list or something else, and you don't go into another 15 years of argument about it? Who is accepting it? Then there's another big argument that the family members of politicians, they will be sent to protect the vested interest. But has that not happened with males? I mean, we've got chief ministers who were selected by their fathers, who were practicing medicine in some other country, they were brought back. One was an engineer in another country, he was brought back. Rajiv Gandhi, when his younger brother passed away tragically, he was brought in. So this has been happening throughout. So why should only women have these special criteria applied to them when it's their chance to get in? I think this is all very bogus. And number two, the women like Madhu Kishwar who go on talking about this Bahu, Biwi, Beti brigade, but in her own alternative, which is in the lists, they have not excluded Bahus and Biwis and Betis. So why is it thought that if lists are made by party leaders, they will exclude their own family members. Our point is that women have a constitutional right to be representatives, not just to be represented, but to be representatives. This is the best way that we have come out with after years of debate and drafting. And for 15 years now, there's been enough debate about it. 3 times or 4 times, the committees have gone around the country soliciting opinions, soliciting alternatives. All of those have been placed before them. In their wisdom, at the end of each round, they all come back to the fact that this is the best alternative. So the point is, there's been more discussion on this than on anything else. Why start a process all over again? Let's go through with this bill, let's pass it, and then let's see what happens. Whatever experience we've had of the panchayats has been very positive. It's been extremely positive. Now the studies are coming out to say that the women members are much more involved with development issues, with issues of interest to the people of the village than the others. So that's something very good to build on.